Joan's alarm goes off at 4 a.m. Joan instantly turns the alarm off, rests for a few seconds, then rolls out of bed. She wears gloves on her hands and some kind of bandages on her face. She washes her hands and forearms with soap. Hot steam rises from the sink. She exfoliates. She presses ice cubes into her face. On the drive to the studio, she sits in the back of her chauffeured car, signing photographs of herself. Joan is on her knees polishing the floor of her mansion. She inspects the work of her house cleaner, checking for dust. The room is decorated with photos and portraits of herself. Joan berates her house cleaner for failing to move the potted tree whilst polishing the floor. Joan gets on her knees and scrubs the stain with powdered soap. She tells Greg to take off his shoes because she just cleaned that floor. He removes his shoes and says, "What about the socks?" She locks her eyes on his and whispers, "I can handle the socks." Joan tells Greg that the one thing missing from her life is a baby. He says, "You're too vain to be pregnant." She flashes him an angry look. She says she was pregnant 7 times before and lost them all. Greg tells her that no adoption agency will give a baby to a twice-divorced actress. Joan says, "I never had a father. Ma changed husbands faster than she changed bedsheets." She criticizes her mother's dirt and sloppiness. She says, "Hard times is good for people." A woman at the adoption agency tells Joan they have denied her application. She explains, "You live alone, there's no other family members in the home, you have 2 previous divorces, you're a busy, active woman and an unsuitable parent." Joan stands and snatches the folder from her hands and says, "Don't you dare judge me." Greg procures a child who Joan names Christina. He says, "You're a lucky little girl, very expensive, you cost me a lot of favours." Christina has a birthday party with a carousel, pony rides, a juggler and a monkey. Christina and Joan wear matching dresses. Joan has adopted another child and named him Christopher. Joan holds Christopher and says, "I should like to adopt every unwanted child in the world." 5 cameras record the moment. Joan immediately hands Christopher back and says, "Have Nanny tuck him in properly." Joan calls to Christina, who comes running. They hug. Flashing cameras record the moment. The photographer wants a shot of Christina opening presents. Christina says she has a grass stain on her dress and wants her nanny to clean it before the photographs are taken. Joan says, "It will never show. We'll take the photographs now." The photographer says, "Actually, Miss Crawford, it might read." Joan looks displeased. Christina is tired from practicing her diving. Joan challenges her to a race. She gives her a head start but still wins the race. She makes her race again, gives her a bigger head start and wins again. She struts out of the pool and says, "Ah, you lost again. I'm bigger, I'm stronger, and I'll always beat you." During a row in Joan's bedroom, Greg tells Joan that her career is floundering because she's getting old. Joan tells Greg, "You're nothing but a rotten, crooked lawyer supplying the grease that makes this shitty movie business work." Greg starts getting ready to leave. Joan says, "Where are you going?" Greg says, "Where I belong, out of here." Joan says, "You belong here," and leans back on the bed. Greg says, "Good night." Joan says, "If you leave, you'll never come back in again, no matter what you say or do." When Greg steps through the door, she starts to cry and says, "Please don't leave me here alone." Greg leaves. The next morning, Joan is sat on her bed, cutting and tearing Greg's face out of all their pictures. Christina stands with Christopher in front of one of the defaced photographs and says, "If she doesn't like you, she can make you disappear." Christopher and Tina are playing noisily in the garden. Joan yells at them. Tina apologizes. Joan reminds her that she had promised to be quiet so she could get her sleep. Joan witnesses Christina in her room chastising her dolls for waking Mommie. Christina later finds her dolls have disappeared. She runs to Joan, who tells Christina, "That's good. They were thoughtless, selfish, spoiled children. Now they won't wake you up when you need your rest." Joan is told to leave Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer because her recent films have been losing money. Joan kneels in her garden, cutting down her roses and screaming the phrases, "Hollywood royalty" and "box office poison." She tells Carol Ann to wake the children and bring them to the garden. Joan yells, "Tina, bring me the axe." Tina hands her the axe and watches while Joan cuts down the apple tree. Tina refuses to eat the bloody steak that has been served for lunch. Joan tells Tina to put the plate in the fridge and that she must eat it for dinner tonight, alone in her room. Joan finds the uneaten plate on her daughter's bedside table. The next morning, while the family are eating Cheerios, Tina finds the same plate in her place at the table. When Tina still refuses to eat it, Joan tells her to throw it in the trash and then exclaims, "Why must everything be a contest?" Joan is walking around the children's bedroom in the middle of the night. While browsing Tina's dresses, she discovers something that upsets her. A dress on a wire clothes hanger. She walks towards the children's bed and screams, "No wire hangers! What's wire hangers doing in this closet when I told you no wire hangers ever?" She criticizes her daughter and then once again screams, "What's wire hangers doing in this closet?" She starts tearing down all the dresses and says, "We're going to see how many wire hangers you've got in your closet." When she finds a second wire hanger, she brandishes it whilst yelling the word, "Why?" She starts beating Christina with the wire hanger. She tells Christina to clean the bathroom. Christina says it is clean. Joan starts flinging soap suds all over the place while screaming, "Nothing is clean, this place is a mess." One of Joan's gentleman callers comes to the house. Tina fixes him a drink. He is alarmed by the amount of scotch that she pours into his glass. She says, "I fix all my uncle's drinks this way." While Joan and this man are flirting, Tina goes downstairs, fixes a tall glass of gin, and brings it upstairs to her mother. She hands her the glass and says, "I made you a fresh one." Joan says, "Thank you," and Tina walks slowly out of her mother's room, looking over her shoulder as she leaves. In the next shot, Joan is taking Tina to a boarding school while Tina begs to be forgiven for whatever it is I did. Joan and Christina are dining in a restaurant. Joan finishes her gin and signals for another. She tells Christina to sit up properly. Joan says, "Isn't this fun, us having a date?" Christina doesn't answer. A waiter brings 2 menus. He compliments Christina's hat. She says, "Thank you, I picked it out myself." Joan says, "Don't flirt, Christina," then orders the same meal for both of them. Christina reluctantly hands back her menu. After a brief quarrel about Christmas cards, Joan says, "I treat you to a lovely evening. What do I get? Smart Alec backtalk." Joan tells Christina that they are broke and she can no longer pay the tuition for her boarding school. Tina will have to start working part-time at the school to pay her way, but then Tina discovers boxes filled with designer shoes that have just been delivered to the house. Christina gets in trouble at school for making out with a boy. The headmistress wants to put Tina on probation, but Joan decides to take her out of the school. She falsely tells a reporter that Tina was expelled. During the resulting argument, Joan asks Tina, "Why can't you give me the respect that I'm entitled to?" Joan marries a Pepsi-Cola executive named Alfred, and they move to New York. Christina is working in the evenings and pursuing acting roles in the daytime. She asks Joan to give her some money to help with expenses. Joan says, "Not a cent." But Alfred secretly hands Tina some money. He tells Joan that their expenses, particularly on the apartment they are renovating, are putting them in debt. Joan believes that Al can find some way to get Pepsi to pay for their apartment and assures Al that he can sort it all out. Upon Al's death, the board members of Pepsi tell her that Al had to borrow against his shares in the company and draw additional expenses in order to pay for the apartment. They expect her to give up the apartment and repay Al's debts. Joan says, "You think you're very clever, don't you? Trying to sweep the poor little widow under the carpet. You drove Al to the grave and now you're trying to stab me in the back?" She threatens to start a smear campaign against Pepsi and then yells, "Don't f*** with me, fellas. This ain't my first time at the rodeo." Tina lands a role in a soap opera. Carol Ann says she's doing well. Joan says she's improving. Carol Ann says the fans are impressed with Christina. Joan says, "Well, something good had to rub off." Tina develops an ovarian tumor and has to drop out of the soap opera for a while. Joan talks to the show's producer and lands herself a role filling in for Tina while Tina is in hospital. Tina complains that her character is supposed to be 28 years old. She watches from her hospital bed while a drunk Joan struggles with her lines. After her death, Joan's lawyers reveal that Joan's will leaves nothing for her children. Christopher says, as usual, she has the last word. Christina says, "Does she?"